Hello, friend. Excuse the horrible looking video, but my video studio is currently being sort of remodeled. Not important. I figured it was only appropriate that when responding to a Rick Beato video that I would just randomly go live because he does that fairly often, which is pretty awesome. And I've never done that. So here we are going live randomly for the first time, I believe, ever. Because I just wanted to get this out there because I finally watched the video that Rick made about today's lyrics being pathetic. And immediately I was like, yes, Rick Beato is finally talking about lyrics a little bit, because he's admitted before that he usually doesn't think too much about the lyrics, which I guess if you're a listener or watcher of his, that's kind of obvious, because he's always talking about the production and the music theory, which I think is great. He's fantastic at that. There's no better ambassador for the value of music theory than Rick Beato, which makes him a legend in my book. But he finally talked about lyrics in a way that wasn't throwaway, possibly out of frustration. But if you haven't seen the video, first of all, check it out at some point. But second, the basic idea of it is he's saying, I was listening to some recent songs and thought, wow, these lyrics are awful. They're so bad. And then he was left with the question, do lyrics even matter? Which I know is a thing that often in emails and things, I get people with a similar sentiment. And I love the conclusion he came to, which we will get to. But actually, let's start with that. So the conclusion he got to is that lyrics do matter, but they don't matter to most people. And I think that is a great way of looking at it for many reasons. Because it sort of makes the point that, of course, lyrics matter to the quality of a song, but that doesn't mean that a ton of human beings who are listeners actually care or notice. This is always going to be true in art. This is something we've been talking about, or I've been talking about for a little bit now, so you might be tired of hearing about it. But there's this difference. Like, the idea that popularity is the only thing that matters for any form of art is, I think, patently ridiculous. Popularity doesn't make something good, and it also doesn't make things bad either. But they're two totally separate discussions. So his quote is essentially making the point that, of course, lyrics matter. Lyrics absolutely determine the quality of a song to a degree. Now, we may disagree on the degree that is important, but certainly a part of the quality of the song is the lyrics. Otherwise, lyrics wouldn't be in songs. It's a part of the song, so it's fair game to talk about as far as determining to some degree the quality of a song. But I think he's also right that to a lot of people, they don't matter. A lot of people aren't listening to lyrics. But again, I think this is something that's true in any art form, where a lot of times, a lot of the art in, say, a movie goes past most people. Most people aren't going to notice a lot of the artistic things that a filmmaker might do. Something I mentioned, I think, really early on in the podcast was something like, don't be afraid to let your brilliance go unnoticed. And that's not to say like, oh, you're brilliant and you should have a big head, so much as don't be afraid sometimes to do things that are good, that make the song good, that, put extra effort into lyrics, crafting your song, getting your melody just right. Even if nobody will ever notice, first of all, you notice. So that should count for something. And second, a lot of times, whenever you put a lot of effort into things, it goes unnoticed. We shouldn't only care about writing a good song as far as it gets noticed. And if it doesn't get noticed, then we don't do it or care. And I think the main thing I wanted to hit at that he doesn't talk about in the video, that at least strikes me, and it's sort of the answer to his maybe implied question, which is, why are modern, especially pop lyrics, so bad? They're so bad. And we're not going to talk about why they're bad from the standpoint of like, what about them is bad? Because if you have eyeballs and a brain and can read, they're just obviously bad. And he breaks down 2 examples, including the Beyonce song, which honestly, the Beyonce song I think is below average and not good, but there's way worse songs lyrically out there. And far be it for me to defend Beyonce, and I'm not defending Beyonce. That song is also crap, but it's not maybe the best example that he could have chosen to really drive home the point of sort of how on average the lyrics are just pathetic right now. But I think the reason largely is incentives. The luxury that you and I have of people who just are in our basement or wherever we are writing songs, and we're writing songs essentially that we would want to hear maybe, or we're writing songs that just feel right to us, that we believe is the songs are truthful to us, who we are as artists, the world, something that's meaningful to us. We're not really probably thinking about, how is this gonna, wow, excuse me for my cat just deciding to be in a fight right now. But we are not burdened with all of the things that you're going to have as, say, a pop artist, right? They're essentially a business at this point. And there's an interesting tension with business and art. And even though I think business is great, far be it from me to be anti-business. I do think that business, almost always, the more business gets into art, the worse it makes it. Think about how, corporatized movies, like it just makes it soulless and terrible. Like it's just cookie cutter. Like the plot is the same plot as every other movie. Like the MCU got to this point. I would argue that it started with a soul, but being a little, corporatized. And then it got like really just corporatized to the point that basically nobody likes it anymore. Or, Star Wars, I don't think anybody's like, oh, Star Wars got better when Disney bought it and it got corporatized. Like, no, it didn't get better. And I think with pop music, it goes through sort of the same thing. I'll pick on Dua Lipa, but just because it's the first artist to come to mind. Something that she has to think about when putting out the next song is really just, will this song or will a couple songs from this album be successful singles that grab people's attention right away, people will want to hear on the radio, that people will put on their playlist because it makes them feel good and bob their head or whatever they're looking for, tap their foot. That's her concern. That's her thought. Probably. I don't pretend to be a Dua Lipa's mind, but her incentive, because of millions and millions of dollars on the line, her incentive is no longer just like, hey, let me write a song that I feel is good. Let me write a song that means something to me. Ignoring the fact that a lot of pop music, there's 10 writers on it. So the idea that Dua Lipa or any pop artist is doing hardly any writing on their song is already deeply flawed. Ignoring that for a moment. The incentive structure is just different because not only do they have to worry about fans, and fans are something that can push you in one direction or another, which if you or I are just writing songs for us and, 50 people that care about what we're doing, you're not thinking about like, well, what do the fans want? Like what fans, right? And there's a good side of that. It relieves you of, you can just do what's right for the song or do what you want to do as an artist and not worry about that. But not only that, but with pop artists, if you can even call them that, pop stars, they also have they need to keep a record deal that's worth millions and millions of dollars. They need to sell ticket sales to keep a record deal, to make the money that they're making. So they've effectively become very much a business in a way that you or I probably have never once thought about the business side of what we're doing. At best, maybe you've thought like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could just do music and not do whatever my day job is? Maybe you've thought that. But the incentive structure, especially for pop music, has become just have a song that's going to be successful on TikTok or something that people with their attention span will catch their attention right away because you have 2 seconds at best to catch their attention. And then you get to keep your record deal and you get to keep pumping out singles and people come to your tour and you make millions and millions of dollars. And most of these people, to Rick Beato's point, don't care about lyrics. Most people who listen to pop music are not people who care about music. It's like most people who go to, action movie fans maybe aren't into, incredibly deep characters. No, they want to see people get shot or whatever in a movie. They want to see Jason Bourne beat up on some people. I know it's an old reference at this point, but that's not what they're looking for, right? When McDonald's does not exist to serve your uncle who has refined taste and likes his $100 steaks and drinks tea with his pinky in the air, right? That's not what McDonald's is for. That's not what it's for. And pop music is not for people who care about the crafting of a lyric and a lyric that's moving and a lyric that means something. Most people who are listening to pop music, they just want something that can fill their ears and make them feel good for 3 minutes. That's what they're looking for. In the same way that there are people that like going to, say, action movies or whatever genre movie, they don't care that they're not going to remember the movie once they walk out of the theater. They just wanted a good time for those 2 hours. Now, those movies then are not going to go on to become all-time classics. They're not going to be movies that people watch over and over again. In the same way, that connecting back to the Rick Beato video, he talks about how essentially he compares it to a Beatles lyric and how great that allegedly is. I would have to read through it again to make my own judgment. What he read, it sounded poetic, but sometimes just because something sounds poetic doesn't mean it actually is. Sometimes it obfuscates the fact that it's really stupid. And it's John Lennon, so I reject the premise that it must be brilliant. It might be. I just don't actually know enough to make a comment on the specific lyric he's talking about. But at the very least, it certainly is obviously better than the other ones he was comparing it to, for sure. But regardless, I think music and songs with great lyrics, that's what's going to make it last longer, and that's what's going to make it timeless, though. Because the songs that he was ranting about, including the Beyonce song, nobody will remember that probably even 6 months from now, much less years from now, much less 50 years from now. Whereas, the Beatles song you've referenced is probably already 50 years old, or maybe 40 years old. I'd have to do some math and look it up, which I'm not going to do. But I think lyrics do matter when it comes to a timeless song that actually touches people's hearts. When it comes to your run-of-the-mill, cookie-cutter, this week's pop song that sounds slightly different enough to get you to bob your head and you're not sick of the chorus yet, lyrics don't matter for that. And I think these artists and the songwriters and the whole corporatized pop music industry is not incentivized to make great lyrics or write great lyrics because the people that listen to pop music don't care. Therefore, why would they? Right? I think people generally follow the incentives. And unfortunately, when they become that big of a business with that much money on the line, they're trying to write as many songs as possible to pump out a song that makes people, bob their head and is catchy and people like, maybe has a great melody. But lyrics for people who listen to pop music, that's not what they're looking for. Your friends and your relatives and you who maybe care about lyrics, you probably don't listen to much pop, right? You're listening to folk. You're listening to certain indie or not indie rock artists that actually care about their lyrics or singer-songwriter stuff. It's always going to be the case that different genres of things attract different people and people who are looking for different things. An example I used recently is when it comes to say movies, because that's my favorite example to go to because I think everybody can relate to them. But world building is something that if you're into, action movies, in most action movies, world building is irrelevant. Has anybody ever watched a Bourne movie, since I mentioned that already, and thought but what about the world building? It's presumably in our world. Even James Bond is sort of just presumably in our world. There's no thought to world building. But that's incredibly important to something like Dune or sci-fi or fantasy. if you don't have great world building in sci-fi or fantasy, you're done. You're toast. And in a similar way, I think lyrics are something that, if you're a folk artist, if you're an artist of other genres that attract people that maybe are looking for a song to move them, or a song that is going to resonate with them and is going to talk about something meaningful, make them think, maybe even basically be like a shot of philosophy, if you will, like 4 minutes that makes people be like, huh, I didn't think of things that way. Those people are not listening to pop music. So anyway, I know this is weird. I've never done this before, and I know this camera looks absolutely awful. This is on a $200 Chromebook. Also, it is almost midnight, which makes me insane to do this. Some of you are probably thinking, is he in a different time zone than I think? Like, did he just randomly go live on a Saturday night at why? And that's a good question. The answer is my video studio is currently out of action, getting rebuilt for a vocal booth I'm doing, which I'll probably make a video about. Be sure to let me know if that's something you're interested in, vocal booth sort of stuff. But anyway, all to say, I'm glad Rick Beato talked about this. I think it needs to be talked about more. I think something else he said, we'll probably wrap up with this, but I forget the exact quote. I did not write it down, which I should have. Well, a couple things. One thing he said, this quote I did write it down. He said, Beyonce is so good you don't even notice how bad the lyrics are. Now, what he means by that is Beyonce is such a good singer that you don't notice how bad the lyrics are. I think that's a part of the puzzle too, is a lot of pop artists, I think it's a misnomer to call them artists, because a lot of times they're performers, and elite performers usually, right? Ariana Grande can sing like crazy. Beyonce can sing like crazy. They're very, very talented. But an artist creates things, and they create recordings, I guess. They perform songs, but they usually are barely a songwriter, barely a producer. So I don't really know what they're creating. Not sure that artist is technically the right term, which upsets some people, but I don't know. I think there's a discussion to be had that they should not be called artists, because the artist must create things. And if you're just a performer that's famous for performing things, you're a performer, not an artist. But anyway, I think that's a good point he brings up. That is a real thing, right? I've never really thought about, For My Heart Will Go On, is that lyric any good? I barely even noticed, because Celine Dion's performance is so incredible. I think the lyrics are just like super run-of-the-mill pedestrian, like not bad, not terrible. They're just like, they exist. They're there. Maybe above average. I don't know. I'd have to look at them. But her performance is so great, and the melody's so great, and so many of the other things that you just might not even notice. So I think that's part of it too. But something Rick Beato said that we'll wrap up with, because I don't want this to be long, A, because it's midnight, and B, because I did this randomly. So hopefully it's not terrible. Hopefully I'm eloquent the first time. But he, I think, made some offhand comment about how lyrics are never as great as poetry, or the standard for lyrics is lower than poetry. And I think that he's right, but also it shouldn't be. Maybe to a very small extent, but I think it's gone too far, where it's like everybody has universally accepted the premise that the standard for lyrics is basically, are they semi-coherent? Not do they tell an interesting story? Are they about something that means anything at all, that matters, that anybody would give a rip about? None of that. Just like, hey, do the lyrics kind of make sense? We don't even hold them to grammatical standards. I mean, half of all lyrics, especially in pop land, are like they're not even grammatically kind of right. And I'm not saying that your grammar needs to be perfect in a lyric if it really works. There may be times to bend that. But they don't even remotely try to care. Half the time, the way you and I speak is actually more poetic than some song lyrics, which is insane, because lyrics should generally be far more poetic than we could be in the moment, right? So if the words I'm using now are actually more poetic or more eloquent than lyrics that were written, that's insane. And with a lot of pop songs, what I'm saying now and what you would say if you were actually talking to me would probably be like better than a lot of the pop lyrics that are out there now. So I guess my challenge to anybody who is watching this, presumably most of you who watch this will watch this in the future and be like, what was that? But is why? First of all, why do we let the standard go down? And should it really be that? Because I think there's a danger in any art form for letting the standard get lower and lower. A big pet peeve of mine recently, I think across the board, people's artistic standards have gone they're just terrible. I mean, the amount of movies now that are just awful that still make tons and tons of money. I mean, the Barbie movie was the biggest movie this year. That's like, as a culture, we should be ashamed of that. Like, as a culture, we should be ashamed of that. Like, Oppenheimer came out and Barbie won money-wise. That's it's sad on so many levels. I mean, one, it's a Nolan movie. He's a proven director. Two, like, one's a biopic, however you say that, about a very interesting part of history, like, there's so many reasons that's sad. And that's probably not the best example either. But, like, even MCU movies, again, the first arc, the first Infinity War saga, whatever, pretty good as far as superhero films go. But are those really what should be the biggest movies every year? There's nothing wrong with that per se. But it's something where I think it started with, yes, they were genuinely pretty good, especially for superhero movies. For like an action superhero movie, they were genuinely well written. That doesn't mean they're all-time great movies, but they were good. They were solid. And then at some point, I think people got duped into, oh, they gave me an Easter egg that I thought was cool. And even though the plot's incoherent, they said funny things, even though all the jokes are the same. And the plot's incoherent, and the hero didn't even do anything. The villain is a nothing burger. I mean, Marvel villains were always a nothing burger in the MCU, unfortunately. But it's just one of those things. I'm not trying to go on an MCU rant, but it just seems to me that as a culture in the last 20 years, we have gone off the deep end with like no artistic standards at all, to the point that people will like actually virtue signal about like, oh, well, I like all music. Like, what a dumb thing to say. Like, it's just one of those things. So many people say that, and it's so overtly ridiculous. 1 second. Like, basically what that person is saying is, I have no standards whatsoever, and I'm proud of that. That's what you're saying, right? You like all music? Like, none of us should like all things. Beyond even just taste, right? And there's no accounting for taste. But beyond that, a lot of stuff is bad, right? A lot of the bookshelves at IKEA, or maybe not at IKEA, but a lot of bookshelves that somebody could conceivably build are going to be bad. A lot of paintings are going to be bad. Just anything with art, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's bad. A lot of movies are bad. If you like every movie you see, then you just don't have any standards, because they're not all that good. Especially now. Frankly, if you've seen 5 movies this year that came out this year and you thought they were great, already we're at like, maybe our standards are a little low. But anyway, that was the final point. It's already gone on longer than I wanted to. But I'm glad Rick Beato talked about this. Check out his video, because he made a good point, and it was 8 minutes, which was shorter than this. But I'm glad that Rick Beato finally touched on this, because he's always been an absolute hero in the music theory space and just in music appreciation in general. I consider him the godfather of music YouTube, whether accurate or not, or grandfather, I don't know, both. Dude's a legend. Glad he finally talked about this, because a lot of people listen to him, as they should, about a lot of things. And it just needs to be talked about more. That our lyrical standards are garbage, and we need to rectify that. Like, as it applies to you and I, we need to not allow the garbage that is pop music to influence us. Of like, well, Dua Lipa's new song is totally incoherent and makes no sense and has terrible lyrics, so mine can too. No, if we care about the craft of songwriting, we should care about actually writing good lyrics. If you want a timeless song, I think lyrics still matter. And just in general, we shouldn't make choices in art just based on the success or the business side, because while business is good and art is good, I think the more business influences art, the more it ruins it. Whether we're talking about Disney taking over Star Wars, or the MCU eventually totally losing its soul, or basically anything else, where the more songwriters on a song, usually the worse it is. The more, once an artist gets popular and they have all the producers and stuff, it usually becomes this soulless cookie cutter crap. So yeah, Rick is totally right about basically everything he says in that video. Lyrics don't matter to a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that lyrics don't matter, which again is me just basically copying his phrase. So go check out his video. I'm not taking credit for that phrase, but I will probably steal it in the future because it's good stuff from Rick as always. Anyway, if you tuned in now, you're a crazy person, apparently, like me, or you live in a different time zone. If you're checking this out later, hopefully you check out his video. Hopefully it gives you some food for thought about lyrics. And hopefully maybe if you're somebody who thought I was a crazy person when I'm talking about how I've said for years, ever since like episode 1 of the podcast, that like lyrics suck now. Like the standard for lyrics is super low. And now I think it's even worse, and especially true in pop music. And now Rick Beato said it. So now I get to feel vindicated because all the haters that were like, Joseph, you just blah, 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 whatever. Rick Beato agrees. So good stuff. Anyway, have a good night. Have a good rest of your day, whatever's going on. Go write some songs, unless you're watching this live, then it's late, maybe don't. And I will talk to you in the next one.